Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Alicia Barrett. I'm with Binny's Beverage Depot, but our special guest, the real person you should be excited to see tonight is Janet Trefethen of Trefethen Family Vineyards. And I was telling Janet, I'm just so excited for our conversation tonight, because in preparation, you will not believe the amazing things that Janet has done over her lifetime in Napa Valley, and born and raised there in California, and made her first wine with her husband John in 1973, and has done so much for women, for the wine industry, for food, for Napa Valley. And we're going to touch on all of that as we also taste along this evening. So Janet, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you. This is fun. And I'm just so glad you've got this fabulous focus on women in wine. Bravo to all of you at Binny's. Great.
Excellent. Well, I want to start with kind of where you grew up, Janet, and what your childhood was like. And by the way, for those of you watching and tasting along, we're going to start with the Chardonnay. So I know you'll be eager to pour yourself a glass and get started. So please do that. We're going to get to it and talk about it in a few minutes. And if you do have questions, please submit those via the Q&A function on Zoom. But yes, Janet, tell us about where you grew up, what your childhood was like. Who were kind of the big influential figures in that stage of your life?
Well, it's so funny. I think you'd probably have to get out a magnifying glass on the map to see where I grew up, because it is in very rural Northern California, about halfway between Sacramento and Chico, for people that are somewhat familiar with the state. And it's definitively agriculture, a lot of farming. Most people don't know it. But California is the third largest rice producing state in the union. And so I grew up with my dad farming rice. And it was a very rural community, and there wasn't a heck of a lot to do. And so we rode a lot of horses, and I spent a lot of time in the saddle. And my mother, of course, was a big influence, but my dad, I have three sisters, two older sisters and one little sister that came along as a surprise. And Dad used to take myself and my two older sisters when we were I was probably 8 years old. And he would pack us in with our horses and two mules into an area called the Yollobole Wilderness Area. And I bring this up because it gave us, maybe we'd see one or two people during that entire time that we were out there, and gave me a definitive sense of independence and how to survive and get along on your own. And I know that that's formed part of who I am today. My mom, and we're going to go, I guess, into food. Mom was just, she was as comfortable in her jeans as she was in formal dress attire. She was one of those very unique, wonderful women who, I think all of us, our mothers, have been such big influences in our lives. And Mom was a great cook. And she was a great supporter of all of our horseback riding efforts. And so I guess that probably leads into food and wine. You know what goes with rice? If you're out living in the middle of an area that is rice fields, you are on the flyway for ducks and geese. Oh. And that means that all sorts of sophisticated, wonderful people come from the city, like San Francisco, and to go hunting. And they would bring wonderful gourmet food with them and bottles of wine, because wine was not really served at my house. My dad would have a bourbon. He was a bourbon man. Lord Calvert was his favorite. But anyway, I remember those fellas from the city who would come, and their breath would smell so good. It smelled just like the priest on Sundays, and it was that winey smell. And I just thought, I want to try that. It smells so good. So that's the background. Mom would do all the cooking. I did not. I was a very picky, horrible eater until after I graduated from college, and I went to France on my own. And I went over there to study French and to live in Europe for a while. And this was a long time ago when you could still hitchhike and do crazy things like that. And my favorite thing to do, and it was in the winter, and I was in a very cold part of France in Besançon, and was to go to the farmer's market. Oh my gosh, was that fabulous. And they had such great, fresh food. And that's where I really, that percolated my interest in wine and food very definitively.
So let's stay on that food subject. You return from France, you come back to Napa Valley and to Northern California at that point. And tell us about, the state of the culinary world. And, you just left France where you had all this beautiful fresh produce and fruits and so forth, and started to fall in love with food, and then you return. So can you walk us through kind of, the state of affairs at that time, and then what inspired you to take action and I think really help that culinary scene quite a bit?
I was really determined. I could have stayed in France. I was offered a couple of jobs, but I wanted to get home and start making my own way financially. And I went around and I left my resume in a number of places. And it's an interesting time especially for younger women that don't know that era, in that I had a degree from college in journalism and public relations. And the first thing that I was always asked whenever I would apply for a job was how fast I could type. That was a very, very typical, we're right into that transition period of the women's movement. Not really being recognized yet for all our capabilities and strengths, but working really, really hard towards trying to show what we could do. And I ended up in the Napa Valley after going around. Well, first I went to work at Squaw Valley Ski Resort, and I worked as the assistant to the food and beverage manager, who was Swiss. And that was a very interesting experience. And then I came to the Napa Valley and went to work for the Wine Growers Foundation. And what was it like then? There were probably about 30 wineries in the Napa Valley. Oh boy, just basically a culinary desert when it came to eating. Most people won't believe me when I say that, because for the people that know Napa Valley today, with we probably have more fantastic restaurants, or did before COVID, per square foot or per square person than any other community our size. And so there you have it, a culinary desert. People I really have always said that food and wine go together. And I personally believe that food follows wine. And in the Napa Valley, you have just the awakening time of wine, and people starting to come to realize that they have these amazing palates in their mouths. And along with that comes along food. And that's, for us in particular, I believe that wine is at its very best at the table. And what we would do in that era is, if I had a journalist or a special person like Barbara from Binny's coming to taste our wines, there wasn't a restaurant that we could take them to. Well, there was, but you didn't really want to, if you know what I mean. And so I did the cooking, and a group of us got together because, well, none of us were true chefs. We were just we like to cook, and
You
we
are being
started.
modest, Janet. You
And
are
I know,
being modest. I did see a video of Janet preparing Christmas dinner for Julia Child.
oh,
So,
that was something else, right? That's when I was young and not afraid.
well, you're clearly
But
very
anyway,
talented.
we started the Napa Valley cooking class in 1973, and what we did is we had various chefs, and this is before chefs were so famous and superstars and all that, and so we had people like Wolfgang Puck and Thomas Keller and Jeremiah Tower and all these absolutely stunning. And don't let me leave out Cindy Paulson. I mean, she's just equally as fabulous as all the rest of those fellas. And they would come and give us a cooking class, and it was mostly a demonstration. And from that, our expertise, I guess, or our knowledge in food and wine really grew and expanded, I think.
Yeah. So Napa Valley cooking class that you co-founded. What an enormous contribution. I do want to get into the first wine, if you don't
Oh,
mind.
absolutely.
Let's go ahead and taste.
As we get into that first wine, and I hope that people do have our Chardonnay in front of them, or I feel like this is kind of sinful, It's only 3:00 in Napa.
Well, Janet, this is one time when I can say that it's 5:00 here in Chicago. So,
But before you even taste that, I need to introduce Trefethen, because
yes. So
we are, if I may, because we are, to my knowledge, the only winery that can tell you that we have grown every single grape that's gone into every single bottle of Trefethen wine since we started in 1973. So what does that mean? See this vineyard behind us? We have gone in and researched. Well, first of all, let's even go back further than that, because when we really started in 1968, and that's when we started the vineyard, over half of the Napa Valley was planted to something other than grapes. So we had a lot of peaches, prune orchards, hay fields, things like that, some cattle. And so we went in and really studied the soils and talked to some old timers that had farmed there in the pre-phylloxera era, when we still had some grapevines, and talked to University of California, Davis, who was really on the cutting edge at that time, and then determined what should be planted where. And then we undertook the Herculean task of transferring 500 acres of mismatch into a very organized vineyard, with each varietal planted where we thought it should go based on a farming standpoint. No one could forecast at that time, and I don't think they still can forecast what people are going to be drinking 5 years from now, which is the basic investment you have when you plant a grapevine. So here we are. You've got Trefethen Chardonnay. This is where we started. And our philosophy of winemaking is to go out into this glorious vineyard, to grow absolutely the very, very best grapes we possibly can, and then simply enhance the most positive characteristics of those grapes, their personality, in the winemaking process, and put forward a very natural product for the consumer. And so when you start with Chardonnays, we found something we weren't anticipating. And let me again tell you, you got to go back to what the Napa Valley was like at the time. no, very few people were drinking wine. Very few people had heard of the Napa Valley. And if they were going to drink wine at all, they usually looked across the pond, and it had to be from Italy or France or Spain to be any good, or Germany, because people were drinking a lot of Rieslings at the time as well. And it actually was the absolutely perfect time to start making wine, because we could make mistakes and we could experiment, and there weren't the only wine writer that was out there at the time went by the motto that if you don't have something nice to say, don't say it at all.
Mm-hmm.
And the 100-point scale had not yet been invented as it relates to wine today. So we learned that where we are in the middle of the Knoll district, AVA of Napa, that we get this bright acid in our grapes that gives this liveliness to the wine, and we wanted to bring that forward. And so the first Trefethen wines, and mind you now, there weren't all the tonnelleries, the barrel makers that exist in the California today. There weren't any then. There were none. So when we were experimenting, where would you go to get your first oak barrel? Where, Alicia, do you want to take a stab? Or somebody out in the audience? You know, where would you go to get an oak barrel? Because you'd read that that's what the French do.
Yeah. Well, did you pick some up on your trip?
Well, you go back and bourbon country.
Sure.
They were
Okay.
making all those oak barrels. And so John and I got in our little single engine airplane, and we flew to Bardstown, Kentucky, and ordered some barrels, and they came, and we were so excited. I mean, you have to understand, this is the beginning, you know? Yes. And it was the beginning for so many people in the Napa Valley. There was, outside of maybe Andrei Telechev, we didn't have winemakers or people that were really knowledgeable as to what they were doing. We all took intensive crash courses, weekend courses at UC Davis to try and expand or learn at least the basics. So we got these barrels, so excited. Thank God we didn't get a lot of barrels. And we put our young Chardonnay juice in maybe it was a third of our production, which was quite small. And we were just so excited. And so we couldn't hold on to our horses. And so we would go, and about, what was it? A month later, we went and we thiefed the barrels, and we pull out a little sample and you put it in the glass. Oh my gosh. It had turned our wine pink. That was the first thing. Those barrels turned it pink, and we said, oh no. And we just, took the thief, put it back in the barrel, closed it up, and then essentially went to church and prayed it was going to get better. And so, a month later, here we are again, thieving out of those barrels. And amazingly, miraculously, the Chardonnay was its original golden, beautiful color. We'd lost all that pink, had settled out of it. And we said, yes, this is it, and so then you swirl the glass, and oh my gosh, it smelled just like bourbon with those toasty barrels that they had.
Sure, those sweet spices, yep.
Oh yeah, so we put those barrels on the bulk market and sold that wine out. And the first Trefethen Chardonnay that was commercially available, which was 1974 vintage, actually had 0 oak in it at that time. Okay. So fast forward, and here we are, it's 1979. We have a few years under our belt, and you have to, remember, this is pre-internet, no cell phones. And I was checking into a hotel in New York to try and peddle our wines. And John, I get a call from John right at the counter as I'm checking in. And I take the phone. He says, "Guess what? Our wine just won this huge tasting in Paris." I said, "What are you talking about? I didn't enter our wine in any competition in Paris." And well, somebody had decided that they were going to put our wine in the competition unbeknownst to us. And we didn't know anything about the competition. It was sponsored by Go Mio magazine, which was giving the Guide Michelin a run for its money at the time. And the Trefethen Chardonnay, they tasted over 300 wines from 52 different countries, and the Trefethen Chardonnay came out number 1.
Wow.
Wow.
Oh.
This was big. And the French got very upset. And Robert Drouin from the House of Drouin threw down his glove and challenged us to a rematch, as all good chivalrous gentlemen would do, yes?
Yeah.
To defend their damsel in distress. So 6 months later at the Hospice de Beaune, they had a rematch of the very top wines, and the Trefethen came out first again, which was just absolutely amazing. And what a story, huh? It's the only wine I know that has won 2 major international competitions like that. And what I'd love to say is, if you've got the 2018 right here, this baby, it just was a Decanter magazine. Well, they just had the international wine competition. They didn't just, it was in August of last year. And 61 judges tasted wine, over 600 wines over the month of August. And they gave the Trefethen Chardonnay 97 points, and it was the highest ranking white wine from the United States. Wow. Here, yay!
Winning more awards. I love it. And if you're tasting this, you know why. And as Janet mentioned, I mean, the acidity is just so bright and so clean in style, yet has all of this wonderful kind of citrus and stone fruit to kind of fill in and balance out that refreshing acidity. It's
and
really
the other thing is that we do allow the wine to retain a lot of its acidity, controlling the amount of malolactic fermentation that it goes through, which reduces the amount of acid. And so anybody and everybody, buy 2 bottles of Trefethen, taste it now, and then put the other one in a dark, cool closet for 10 years and go back and taste it, and you will be rewarded. The wines they just blossom in the bottle and last forever. It's very, very surprising, even to me, after all these years.
Yeah. And this is too one of the benefits, you know, all estate fruit, as you mentioned, but you are in the Oak Knoll district. And so it is much cooler here than in other parts of Napa Valley. And that, you know, sometimes people forget that. So you get a lot of these gorgeously refreshing Chardonnays. And this is no exception. Cindy, who's listening in, says, "Love your story and your wines. It is a great story, and you tell it so well." Quick question here, just from Yvette on, I think when we were talking about food and kind of Napa way back when, but were you aware of Alice Waters and Chez Panisse in Berkeley at the time, she asked.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think Alice started in 72. We started the vineyard in 68 and the winery in 73. And Alice was certainly helping wake everyone's palates up, and also especially to the farming aspect, which I'm so very grateful for. At the same time, closer to Chicago, there was the New French Cafe up in Minnesota, in Minneapolis, and was doing something really very similar at that time to what Alice was doing at Chez Panisse. But I have a lot of admiration for both of them.
I want to move now, Janet, if you don't mind. For those tasting along, you can pour your, the dragon's tooth is what we're going to taste next. But while we do that, we touched on food and the Napa Valley cooking class, and I just want to bring out a few finer points there because you mentioned how important food and wine are together, the importance of the table, the people at the table. If you want to share a little bit about as you were cooking for so many, kind of maybe some of your favorite dishes, maybe some staples of your home that pair well with Trefethen wines, and maybe just a little bit about what it was like when you cooked for Julia Child.
Oh my goodness, those were a lot of questions. Let's see if I can remember all of them and answer some of them anyway. I think that one of the biggest things I have learned that I'd love to share with everybody in terms of food and wine is that you can take a piece of chicken. You know, a lot of people will tell me they're having chicken for dinner. What wine shall they serve with it? And we did a lot of experimenting with different herbs and spices and the huge influence that they have on various wines. And so, for example, if you take our Riesling, which is dry, it loves cilantro and ginger. And so if you want to take a piece of fish or a piece of chicken and you're going to have our Riesling with it, all you have to do is incorporate a little bit of cilantro and ginger with the main ingredients. Similarly with the Chardonnay loves fresh tarragon. There's an anise type of character in our wine, and there's also that character that you can find in fennel, in anise, tarragon, that again, go to the chicken or the fish and sprinkle some of that on there, incorporate it into the cooking, and you've got a dish that's just fabulous to go with Trefethen Chardonnay. Or if you prefer, just have nice fresh oysters. And it will, you know, it has that bright acidity that'll complement the oysters, and the oysters will say, whoopee, I like that Chardonnay. So from my standpoint, an awful lot of it is if you start getting into the red wines, and mushrooms form a terrific bridge between red wines and whatever you're cooking. And the Cabernet in particular loves thyme, fresh thyme, and black pepper, and that will just bring out some of the best. And I already talked about mushrooms, but let's also add beets, because beets go very well with a red wine too. And I love my vegetables. I like to get them in there somehow. So let's see. Then some of my favorite things to cook are things that, you know, when you have guests over, I like to bring people into the kitchen, and hopefully, you know, this is pre-COVID, they like to use their hands. And then you can I'll have all the ingredients for dolmas, for example, but then everybody will make dolmas and roll their own. One of the favorite things we do as a family when Haley and Lorenzo and their families come over is we cook together. And so, and one of our favorites are pot stickers that we can all mix. You know, we're involved in making the mixture and then rolling everything and stuffing things into the paste, to the pasta, and then cooking the pot stickers. So those are some of the fun things. I also just, my most favorite is to walk out into my garden, pick a fresh vegetable, and have husband John grill something. And to me, it's pretty simple, but boy, it's hard to beat. Everything's just so fresh and it tastes so amazingly good. For example, I have some tangerines growing up here, and going out and picking a fresh tangerine and eating it right there is so different than the tangerines you get in the supermarket.
Yeah. Well,
what was it like with Julia? Well, Julia was just an amazing individual. She was always so positive, always so positive. And, I think we all remember that one TV series she had when she dropped the chicken on the floor. And then she kind of said, well, nobody's looking. It's all right. Just put it back on the platter and keep going. um, and so she had this wonderful tendency of helping people around her relax. She's very, very gracious. And so I think that probably the funny part of doing Christmas dinner for Julia was that, they in that era, they came to my house to shoot all of this. And it was right before Thanksgiving, and the kids were in grade school. I think Haley had just started grade school, and Lauren was probably in the third or the fourth grade. And I had to have the house decorated for Christmas. And they came home because it's right before Thanksgiving. And Mom, what's wrong with you? It's Thanksgiving time. It's not Christmas time. Anyway, it was just a great honor and a pleasure and a delight to have Julia here.
Yeah. Wonderful stories. And I love your reminder of just, it's so important what spices, what herbs, what sauces that you cook with. It's beyond just the principal ingredient, beyond just the chicken or beyond just the fish. So thank you for those tips. Let's go ahead and taste your dragon's tooth here.
I hope everybody has the dragon. And just because wine sounds better when it makes music, right? Then we get to involve the other sense of hearing. A toast to everyone. The dragon. There's another story here. Sorry, can't help myself, but can you see the label? You further kind of? Yes?
Yes,
no?
Yes, there you go. Perfect.
There's the label. Oh, good. You can see it, especially on your screen. When we had phylloxera in the 90s, I put a very simple sculpture of a dragon out in the vineyard. And I said that was my phylloxera eating dragon. And a lot of people came back to the winery a year or two later, and they wanted to know what had happened to the dragon. And about the same time, my fabulous, incredible mother-in-law passed away, and we wanted to honor her somehow. And she was Welsh. And so is anybody out there Welsh? I stole the red dragon straight off of the Welsh flag. I guess this is kind of confession time. And that was in honor of my mother-in-law. If I ever thought I was going to, in the future, say dragon and mother-in-law in the same breath or the same sentence, I probably wouldn't have done it because she was such an incredible lady. But I just couldn't help myself because of her Welsh heritage and background. So that's, and I love the Dragon's Tooth wine because it expresses the true philosophy of an estate vineyard, in that when we did have phylloxera and we ripped out so much of the vineyard, and I should explain to those people that might be watching that don't know what phylloxera is. It's a root louse that goes in and over time eats away at the roots. It lives under the soil of the vine, and it gradually, it's like a cancer, and it eventually it kills those grapevines. So we had to replant, and we didn't have any Malbec or Petit Verdot at that time. So we decided we would round out and have all 5 Bordeaux varietals in the vineyard by planting Malbec and Petit Verdot. And then, here we are 5 years later, and these yummy Malbec grapes are coming into the winery, and we're kind of looking at each other and saying, well, what are we going to do with this? And we had originally thought we'd blend it in with the Cabernet Sauvignon if it turned out good enough. And in this case, it turned out far beyond our expectations. It was amazingly good. The juice was just so delicious. And it had that yummy upfront friendliness that Malbec has, but it was missing a core, and it kind of missed its center, needed more yoga lessons, you know? And so we added some Cabernet Sauvignon and some Petit Verdot. But the biggest percentage in the blend is Malbec, which is very unusual from the Napa Valley. And and we got this luscious wine, and we said, okay, what are we going to call it? And that's how Dragon's Tooth was born. It wasn't something that we went out and we designed, but it's just so plummy, and at the same time some earthiness and some blueberries perhaps. It's lots of dark brambly fruit and layers of cinnamon, maybe. Are you getting that? And I love the violets as well, because um I can get some of that in there as well. I don't know if you all can or not. And it's just 18 months in oak, 54 to be exact. If you want to know the exact percentages, 54% Malbec, 25 Cabernet Sauvignon, and 16% Petit Verdot, and 5% Merlot. So there you go, and a really yummy, delicious wine.
It is, and as you've described so beautifully, just there is so much luscious fruit here. It's a very fruit-forward wine, and the oak is very well balanced as well. 18 months, you get the tannins to frame out the wine, but they really are kind of the supporting role, I think, for the fruit.
And so it has that lusciousness, but at the same time, it has that brightness that you get out of the Oak Knoll district.
Yes.
And so that's there, which you definitely can get in the finish. I know I'm still feeling a lovely kind of tingly brightness in the finish in the back of my palate.
Yes.
Quite lovely, I think.
Yes, it speaks to the site, and also a great decision on your part of when to pick the grapes, and not allowing them to become overripe, that they're perfectly ripe and very fresh. So Dragon's Tooth, we're very excited to have it at Binny's. We just got the wine in on our shelves, so we hope everyone will that's having it tonight, that you're enjoying it. And if you're watching this at a later date, go and check that out, because it's really a unique and very delicious wine.
And the dragon likes fat. Right? This is this, and so when I go to the kitchen, or I'm thinking of what I'm going to put on the table with the dragon, I look for some meat that has a little bit more fat in it, like a short rib, or something like that. Whereas if I'm going to have a pure grilled filet mignon or something, I'd go more towards our Cabernet Sauvignon.
Yeah, which, speaking of, let's go ahead and pour ourselves the Cabernet Sauvignon here, back into kind of the traditional space as we have this wine. And as we're sipping on it here, Janet, I do want to ask. Obviously, I'm sure there are a lot of women watching, and young women watching, and Trefethen's in the family. You have another generation very much involved now, and kind of running a lot of the operations. I thought
around. Yep.
Yes. So what's, after years of running the business, being a mother, being an inspiration to so many, an entrepreneur among many. So what's a piece of advice that you have to women watching, whether they're in the wine industry, whether they have a family, just in life? What can you share after these years?
Juggling a job, a career of some kind, and having children at the same time, and trying to do your very best for both. It's not easy. Mm-hmm. So I think the first thing that we want to do is acknowledge that. And that means take advantage of all the help around you that you can get. I have been fortunate to have so many people that have helped me over the years, whether it's in my office or my husband or whatever, and wonderful, caring people. So take advantage of them. The other one that is equally as important, whether you have kids or not, is to do life. They say life is too short to drink bad wine, which I definitely agree with. Life is also too short to work at a job you hate. Don't get stuck in a situation like that. I know that especially like when you're graduating from college or whatever, there are a lot of us that don't know what we really want to do. That's all right. Fish around, work at some different jobs, get the exposure, find out what you really want to do. And then believe in yourself. That's the other one that is so important. Believe in yourself and be tenacious. Hang on. There's always ups and downs in every relationship, whether it's love or work. There's hills in all of them. Be aware of that, and just be looking for that glass to be half full rather than empty. And you can do it. Have faith in yourself. You can do it. I know.
Thank you, Janet.
You're welcome.
Very
You're welcome. I mean,
encouraging
it was
words.
like starting the Knoll District AVA. It took me over 11 years.
Yeah.
You just keep in there and you keep at it and keep working in a way, and you can finally do it.
Yeah.
So here we are with a fantastic Cabernet Sauvignon. Whoopee!
Yeah.
And I really, really enjoy blended red wines like Dragon's Tooth. And then I just can't say enough for the classic core of Cabernet Sauvignon. It's so classic and classy at the same time. Where we are, we've already commented on it a little earlier, in that we're in a cooler part of the Napa Valley. And so we farm every year in the vineyard in our Cabernet Sauvignon like it's going to be a very challenging year, because it is a little bit cooler. We're more stringent than most in our pruning, because we control the number of canes that we leave on the vine so that the vine doesn't try and put out too much fruit, and then it can't ripen it because it doesn't have enough heat, for example, in some years. We drop a lot of fruit on the ground. We go through many times and make sure that each of the vines is balanced in terms of the fruit, in terms of where it's located. And so many people don't understand how important the farming aspect is to winemaking. But for us, that's just critical if you're going to produce a really great raw ingredient from which you're going to make wine. And I think we all know that you can make hamburger out of steak, but you can't do the reverse, for example, in the kitchen. So that would be a bit of an analogy. So you've got our Cabernet, and I'd love to brag. This wine, its brother, I'm trying to remember the vintage, but I think it was around in the 90s, was ranked number 1 wine of the year by Wine Enthusiast. Decanter magazine ranked it the best Bordeaux blend, red Bordeaux blend in North America. And most recently, at that tasting we talked about earlier that took place in London, the International Wine and Spirits competition, and the Trefethen Cabernet was given 97 points and was ranked best of show, darling. So I mean to say, it's 84% Cabernet, 3 Merlot, 1 Cabernet Franc, 2 Malbec, and 10% Petit Verdot. Approximately 18 months again in oak. And this wine to me is just, we are, as my friend, the wonderful, fabulous wine writer Hugh Johnson would say, you're robbing the cradle today, Janet, because this wine is so young, you know. Um, we would all do ourselves and the wine a favor if we decanted it an hour earlier. But still, I mean, the fruit just wants to jump out of the glass and give you big hugs. Kind of cherries, boysenberry, black currant, and then we have a little bit of cedar in there, I think, and um, maybe a little bit of bay leaf.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think there's definitely an herbal component to the wine that I adore and adds great complexity alongside the fruit. I agree.
And along with the earthiness, and this wine again, it has that brightness, which I think is the trademark of Oak Knoll, um, of the OKD. But at the same, and it has all the ingredients, but it's not a hit you over the head type of Cabernet Sauvignon. It's a little bit more svelte, if I may say that, a little bit more svelte and sexy rather than a muscle builder, than a muscle bound guy.
Yes.
Um, and
Yes.
that's the way we like it to be.
Yeah.
I
Well, I
think
mean, you
the
used
best at
classy
table.
earlier. You used classy earlier. I thought that was
Yeah,
sort of
it has a
appropriate.
lot of class.
Just a question for you about Cabernet Franc and your thoughts on the grape variety as we've discussed Bordeaux varietals here.
Oh, Cabernet Franc is so much fun. You know, it's what the major ingredient, I think, in Cheval Blanc. And so they talk about the kick that the horse gives you. And I think that Cabernet Franc indeed has that, that little oomph, that little kick that you either like it or you don't. What I really love are the violets when the grapes first come in and you can smell the juice as it first starts to ferment. It's so aromatic and so full of violets. It's I think it's an up and comer as American palates get even a little bit more sophisticated. And again, I can't help but talking about food. And if I'm going to have a lovely grilled pork tenderloin, um, something that I want to bring out the earthiness and the sweetness of the pork, I'll go to the Cabernet Franc.
Yeah. Yeah. I also love the grape myself. Janet, thank you so much. A last question here for you, which is a great one to end on. What do you see as the future for Napa Valley? Where would you like to see it go in the years ahead, especially as younger generations are carrying the Trefethen legacy? What do you want for Napa in the years to come?
Well, from the younger generations, it's great to talk about that because Trefethen personally, you know, Haley and Lauren are coming on strong and taking over, and I think that ensures very much the future of Trefethen in particular. We've been fortunate, I think, in imbuing them with the philosophies that John and I started. They will carry that flag forward, which definitively includes probably even more sustainability because Haley is our guardian of that and is very good at it. I should add that we are certified green, both as a vineyard and a winery. For Napa Valley in particular, it's going to be fascinating to watch with climate change. Are we going to see the Oak Knoll district warm up by a degree or two and become more like Oakville, which is a little warmer? I do think that the valley is, you know, it's only 30 miles long, only 5 miles wide. There's a limited and our county is very stringent on planting on hillsides. So there's only a limited amount of area from which grapes can be made. And I think that there's no other place in the world like the Napa Valley to grow grapes. And I think as long as Americans are drinking wine and appreciating really good wine, the sun will continue to shine on the Napa Valley.
Well, thank you again, Janet, and thank you all for watching. We hope you enjoyed the wines tonight. Please visit your local Binny's to pick these up. I'm going to put them on the screen here. But again, Janet, thank you so much, and cheers to you.
Thank you. What a pleasure, and thanks to everybody for joining us. What a treat, and I can't wait for all of us to be able to get together in person. Yay!
Yes, thank you, Janet. Have a wonderful night.
You too. Take care. How's my horse do?